the ground. And I think, well, if this doesn't appall you, what I'm going to go through, then I don't even know what to say. The war crimes being committed by the Israel Defense Forces, which most Palestinians refer to as the Israeli occupation forces, are now clearly just too grave and blatant and unapologetic to hide. Well, they have been for quite a long time. IDF soldiers keep posting war crimes gleefully. Why? Because they think they're funny, and more importantly, they think a large audience at home will find these war crimes amusing and thrilling, because both the soldiers and the audiences do not see Palestinians as human beings. But as well as that, after over 36,000 Palestinians have now suffered violent deaths, including over 14,000 children, the evidence of Israeli war crimes is just beyond monumental. So you keep getting a certain type of self-described liberal or centrist commentator, often being genuinely horrified. I'm not belittling their horror when they write what I'm going to go through now. And it goes along these lines. Why is there such a dreadful breakdown in discipline in the Israeli army? Now, I'll give you an example of this. One liberal US commentator, in response to some belated but still woefully insufficient CNN coverage of IDF soldiers posting their grotesque behaviour, tweeted, "Insane that this is happening, that any person would be cruel and sadistic enough to post stuff like this, and that the IDF doesn't enforce tighter control of its soldiers. This makes the whole institution look so dysfunctional." Okay, this is frustrating to say the least, and it shows just how the media has largely completely failed to accurately frame this atrocity according to the stated aims and directions of the Israeli state. What we're seeing isn't a breakdown of discipline or authority in the IDF. It's soldiers behaving exactly as you would expect them to behave based on the pronouncements of their leaders. On the 10th of October, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told Israeli troops that he had, and let me quote, released all the restraints. On the 12th of October, the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant then publicly announced he'd removed every restriction on Israeli forces. Now, quite apart from the countless pronouncements by Israeli leaders and officials, many of them overtly genocidal in character, which I've covered at great length before, why didn't just these two quotes frame the media's entire understanding of Israel's onslaught against Gaza? I mean, it's a bit of a clue, isn't it? The Israeli Defense Minister telling Israeli soldiers that he had released all the restraints and removed every restriction on them. I'll level with you, I think that's a bit of a clue. If the Russian Defense Minister had used that kind of language in the days after the invasion of Ukraine, do you think that would have framed our understanding of Russian soldiers' conduct, not least war crimes? Yes or no? In terms of the license they've been given to commit atrocities. What is an Israeli soldier supposed to make of being told they have no restraints or restrictions on them, particularly in the atmosphere after the 7th of October, when the likes of the Defence Minister was calling the population of Gaza human animals? I think they would legitimately understand that as, you can do exactly what you want because nobody's going to stop you and you will suffer no consequences. Now, I did a Google search for the whole of October for those quotes. In the Western media, there is barely a mention of either of them. I found a mention in the Times of Israel, a fleeting mention in an opinion column in the New York Times of one of the quotes, not in the news section though, in Fox News, where you can guess the tone of how they reported it, and buried in an ABC news piece. This should have framed the entire coverage of this onslaught. And indeed,
about black people. The prophet Joseph Smith and Brigham Young taught that black people were under something called the curse of Cain. Joseph Smith taught that this mark was black skin, and that this is where all black people come from. He also taught that this was the reason God permitted slavery. The Book of Mormon, the book of scripture translated by Joseph Smith, also includes verses about how the most righteous people in the book are white and delightsome. The people in the book who sin are cursed by God with a skin of blackness. Some early black members of the Mormon Church were promised that in the afterlife their skin would turn white. Brigham Young taught that interracial marriage should be punished by death. It's not just early church history though, because many Mormon leaders were opposed to the civil rights movement. Throughout the history of the Mormon Church, black people were not permitted to go into the temple to receive the temple ordinances, and they were also not permitted to have the priesthood. These racial restrictions were lifted in 1978 after a lawsuit by the NAACP, though it wasn't until 2013 that the church disavowed its teachings on race for the first time. Today, there are an estimated 400,000 to 1 million black members of the church. Some people dismiss the church's stances as just being a product of the time. And while I might say that argument kind of holds up for a business or an organization or the government, don't you think that God's literal true church on the earth today should be held to a higher standard? Why is God exactly as bigoted and racist as whatever the modern culture is?
I was in Jordan and Israel this weekend, and we just, you gotta keep pushing what you're doing on the humanitarian stuff and all this stuff. So
I told him, baby, show me pieces. I said, baby, you know I should come to Jesus. Sure, just. That might feel good. That was good.
we'll see you.
So good. Talk to you tomorrow.
Yeah. I was telling your secretary.